Hello and welcome back. In this video I'm trying to demystify a little bit the topic of AGI, so-called, or AI in general. There's a huge hype going on at the moment, 2026. We have April and it's going to be probably going even further, a couple of more months. Basically, a lot of people, they think, and a lot of ex-Google CEOs or whatever, like big names, they giving podcasts, interviews all over the place, telling us, we have 3 more years to earn some money because in 3 years there will be no jobs because AI will be taking over, or AI will develop or already developed its own thinking, its own awareness, its own consciousness or whatever, And these claims, they are completely rubbish. The AI, as we call it at the moment, is nothing but a huge calculator. It's a calculating machine. It's just like basically the computer as we have on our laptop, just multiplied by many hundreds of thousands of more power towards it. But it's nothing else than just like the PC basically on our desktop. It's nothing but calculations and algorithms in the back. So it's just numbers, calculations. There is no living something. There's nothing alive. So depending on who you follow or who you talk to, and why these people sometimes are so extreme in their views and everything, take a guess. I would say like 99.9% of all these people who say like, oh, AI is going to take over the world, and AI has developed its own consciousness, or AGI is going to be taking over totally and develop its own thinking and all these kind of things. Each single one of them have one thing in common. They're writing and selling books. They have written some books, or at least one book, and trying to sell it, of course. And it's always been one of the core topics, apart from Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. It's like doom and gloom topics. Yeah, being it in the financial world, or being it in the technology world. It's always been like this. If you have like a doom and gloom topic, write the headline. This is why like all our mainstream news are basically all like negative. It's all about crash and this and war and this drama, and here's people died here in an accident and so on and so on. They will never show you a nice little village in the countryside where nothing is going on, because it's boring, because nobody's going to watch it, right? What we are trying to do here at Scaling Experts basically is to really help companies to scale up the business, and therefore really have a good look at what kind of like technologies and what of kind of like where does AI help, and and to what extent does it make sense, or in what areas it is even counterproductive. I wanted actually to write down here a matrix of maybe 4 areas for medium-sized businesses. Of course, there's like specific use cases for when it comes to machine learning and big factories and things like that. But for medium-sized businesses, you basically have 4 areas, but even these 4 areas, I would have said like 4 areas, like your personal assistant, like who's checking your emails automatically, whatever, this kind of thing, like your virtual assistant turns into an AI assistant. The other point is basically admin, just collecting your invoices and like these really tedious paper, sometimes even paper-driven things. And, of course, there you can use AI to some extent, and automations. It's usually, to the most part, it's automations, and then there's sometimes a little bit AI involved in, but it's just another form of calculations, very fast calculations. And then you have basically in the front end, like you have like marketing aspects where you can use AI, definitely sales to some extent only, customer service and things like that on the front, so basically customer-faced topics. But if you really consolidate these areas into one, lead generation and so on, but if you consolidate these areas basically again, then basically you have only two areas left, I would say. And that's basically, So one area is basically, so you have two areas. One area is basically the admin area, and the other area, marketing, lead gen, sales, is basically growth. So everything that has to do with customer face, growing your business, scaling your business, okay? And there are some instances where you can basically use AI to some extent. And when you're now talking, and then we can go further down, and this is the way bigger part, I would say. Because a lot of people say like, okay, they come to me and say, Thomas, I now turned my software developing company into an AI agency, and I want to sell like optimizing companies, small, medium-sized companies, because they're easier to do. This is the argument. And I want to improve the admin. I want to make it paperless. I want to make it streamlined. I want to make it more efficient and something like that. So, but if you have like any type of medium-sized business, let's say from 200K to 2 million euros or something, or 10 million euros, there's only so much admin work going on in the background. And if it's not a fast-growing company, they don't really have the pressure there to do things. So basically, these things go in hand. Like if you grow fast, then you have the need to really slim down your admin area, because then you have, the bottleneck is then here. So it's like, this VARC, that's, it needs to be in balance. But let's say I have like an overhead in the admin area of 100, let's say abstract 100% overhead. If I optimize that to 60%, then I'm done. I need to move on I need to find the next client. Which is really like, but if you focus on the growing part, eventually you can grow for a very long time and ad infinitum, so more or less like endlessly, until maybe you sell the company or something, And so this is a much, much more interesting area than this one. But it's also a much, much harder area, because to introduce AI into the admin area is not a big deal. Most of the tools are already there, and you just need to implement it. And this is basically, if you go like Carly Mayers, she has this scheme. It's called the audit process scheme. You contact companies, you do an audit, you have checklists, and you just go through. You interview key team leaders or head of departments or whatever, what the bottlenecks are, and then you bring it down to one big report, and then you say, okay, this is the action plan. This is where we can use automation. This is where we can use AI. This is how much it costs, and this is how much you will be saving in the cost in the long run, so the return, and that's probably in the next 6 months. So the scope for each single client is limited, because it's limited on its growth. So if you have a client and you do this admin part, who is not growing, then you do it once and that's it. So basically, it is very interesting for you actually also to have a look at this part, because ideally both, because if you help a client like to grow fast, and then this becomes again a bottleneck, and you need to re-optimize the admin area, the back end, how things run there. So let's talk a little bit about the growth area. It is really interesting, because a lot of people think, well, the tailor sales, the sales reps and all that kind of stuff, it's going to be like all vanishing and being, substituted by AI bots and whatever you name it and so on. Why do they think like this? Because they read the news, okay, and they look into, let's say, the Philippines were big in the news. It's already like half a year ago, or even longer, big in the news, because the Philippines was one of the core call center outsourcing hub for the entire planet. So like companies from China to the US to Russia to wherever, everybody had more or less like all the big companies, really all the big companies, had to some extent the call centers there. Had a few reasons, because a fairly good education, because it comes like from the United Kingdom originally, the education system in the Philippines, and more or less everybody knows English, which is very much different in many other Asian countries and so on. And obviously the wage was very low. So they reduced these call centers, yes, but what do these call centers have been doing mostly is like B2C customer service. sometimes maybe even B2B customer service. So that's a very different thing than the skills and the activities you need to make a company grow. In customer service, basically, you more or less you maintain current customers, and ideally you make an upsell on cross-sell and things like that. To really drive a company in growth, you need outreach. First of all, there is a very strict law in the EU. You're not even allowed to do it. You're not allowed to have bots call out to people, to businesses even B2B. Outbound calling over voice AI, like a bot, is not allowed. And full stop, that's it. I'm not even sure if it's allowed there either. And why? Because it's such a powerful tool. Imagine it would be allowed. If you have a powerful enough server and system running, you could potentially. So it makes sense not to have that legal. So basically, and what does it mean? It means that humans still, telesales, telemarketing, it's still valid. It's still the only way really to do outbound via telephone. And that's just a matter of fact. So there's a lot of nonsense out there, talking about these voice AIs and they're calling out and everything. And even the countries where it is allowed and they tried it, it usually didn't work because people just hung up the phone because they figure out, okay, that's in the voice now. But now you may argue, but it only takes a few more months and then they will be so good. Nobody will be realizing anymore that this is actually an AI, that this is not actually a human. But forget about it, because we are in the EU, in Germany and so on. And in the EU, it's not allowed. Full stop, game over, So you have to have people to do the outcalling. And then you have email is the next thing. Email. In the US, for example, you are allowed to do cold emailing. In the EU, and Germany especially, it's very strict. You're not really allowed to do any cold emailing. You are allowed to do cold calling by people, but not by a voice AI, and not really cold emailing either. So you need to opt in beforehand. And especially if you do many emails at a time, that's really tricky. Messaging works very well. It can be automated. We're doing it, and it's kind of like a gray area, I guess. But it is it has its limits, but it's a very good sort of method in the mix overall. So you see, growth. There's many things you can do in growth, and one of the things is, for example, pre-qualification, using AI for pre-qualification, and there's basically two ways you can do pre-qualification with AI for, let's say, when it comes to the growth part, so marketing and sales. One is basically signal-based, and the other one is basically when somebody already is interested in your product or service and has been contacting you, and then you can use some sort of vector-based AI, chatbots, whatever, to answer their questions and to ask more questions to figure out more what they want. So it's basically just like a chatbot on a website and things like that. That's also allowed. But that's not like you do outbound. It's like somebody already comes to your website and is proactively interested in what you have to offer. But you need to get these people to your website in the first place. And then we are back again to cold calling, messaging, email, and running ads, basically, LinkedIn ads, Facebook ads, YouTube ads, whatever ads. So in some parts you can use AI, but you're limited. And depending on what region you are working on, you're even more limited. US, Europe, Asia. So it's very interesting. And write me in the comments if you have specific questions about AI when it comes to outbound and growth and stuff like that, because it's a really tricky, but also at the same time an area with lots of potential if you really understand and think through thoroughly what you do and how you do it. Okay, bye-bye.